The children said the classroom always smelled of iron and rot. Behind the wooden desk, Mr. Nathaniel Price smiled as he unwrapped a burlap sack, something writhing inside. "Discipline," he whispered. What came next silenced an entire town. In 1861, Maine, and left behind one lesson no one dared repeat. In the winter of 1861, the small coastal town of Derryfield, Maine, received a new schoolmaster. Nathaniel Price arrived by carriage under heavy fog, his thin figure and piercing blue eyes unsettling even before his first lesson began. He was a man of quiet precision with habits that suggested military discipline, measured steps, perfect posture, and a gaze that rarely blinked. Locals welcomed him cautiously. The previous teacher, Miss Haverly, had left suddenly, her resignation unexplained. The children whispered she'd gone mad, though no one confirmed it. Mr. Price was brought in from Boston. A man of strong methods, the Board of Education had said. His first week, he changed everything. New seating charts, no talking, no laughter, no warmth. He hung a brass bell by the door and demanded each student ring it upon entering. "It tolls for your ignorance," he would say, eyes unblinking. The children tried to obey, but fear grew quickly. By the second week, 3 students had fainted in class. One boy claimed he'd seen Mr. Price writing names in a ledger with something that didn't look like ink. The next day, that same boy didn't return. Parents questioned the teacher's methods, but Mr. Price presented himself with cold politeness. "Discipline is mercy," he'd tell them. "Without it, a child rots." Then came the first punishment. When 9-year-old Alice Dunham failed her recitation, Mr. Price made her kneel on the floorboards for an hour, then stand before the class holding a live rat. "Hold your failure," he said. The children screamed. Alice sobbed. That night, her parents stormed the schoolhouse, but Mr. Price had already locked the door from within. "Tomorrow," he said through the wood, "they'll thank me for their obedience." The next morning, Alice's seat was empty. Would you have trusted a man like that to teach your child? Rumors spread through Derryfield like a sickness, quiet but relentless. The Dunham's daughter, Alice, had not returned to school since her punishment. Her parents claimed she was bedridden with fever, but no one had seen her since the night Mr. Price locked the schoolhouse doors. Mothers began walking their children to class in silence, avoiding eye contact with the man who greeted them at the threshold, his fingers clasped neatly behind his back, his voice a thin blade of civility. Mrs. Callahan, who lived across the muddy road from the school, told anyone who'd listen that she often woke to the sound of squealing. "It ain't the children," she said, voice trembling. "It's rats. Hundreds of them. You can hear them scratching through the walls, like they're being called." Few believed her, until one morning a small pile of tails was found neatly arranged beside the well, as if someone had collected them deliberately. Inside the classroom, fear became routine. The air smelled faintly metallic, like old coins, and candle soot. Mr. Price would move between the rows with measured steps, tapping his ruler against his palm. He rarely raised his voice, but his silence carried more threat than shouting ever could. When a student disobeyed, he would remove a small wooden box from his desk. No one knew what was inside until he opened it before them. The first time, the sound that came out wasn't human. It was the shriek of a trapped rat. He would place the trembling creature upon the child's desk and command, "Hold it. Still." Some children froze. Others cried. None dared refuse. "The lesson," he said softly, "is that all creatures respond to fear. Those who conquer it, rule it." One evening, the school janitor, Elijah Moore, stayed late to clean. Through the floorboards beneath the teacher's desk, he noticed a reddish stain, dark, sticky, and fresh. Thinking it was spilled ink, he reached for a rag, but the smell hit him first. Copper, sweet and rancid. Not ink, blood. Elijah told the constable the next morning. The officer visited that afternoon but found the schoolhouse locked. Through the window, he could see Mr. Price at his desk, writing in his ledger, his face calm as if nothing at all were wrong. That night, Elijah Moore vanished. His home stood open, his supper uneaten, his lantern still burning. The town told itself it was coincidence. But by then, no one dared walk near the school after dark. Tell me in the comments, if you heard those sounds from your window, would you have gone to see what was happening, or prayed it would stop on its own? After Elijah Moore vanished, the constable returned to the schoolhouse with a warrant. But by then, Mr. Price had already sealed himself inside. The windows were nailed shut from within, and the iron lock on the front door was freshly forged. Through the cracks, faint candlelight flickered across the dusty panes, and the smell of burning oil drifted into the street. When the door was finally forced open, Mr. Price greeted them calmly, as though expecting guests. His sleeves were rolled neatly to the elbow, his hair slicked back. "Gentlemen," he said, bowing slightly, "I do hope this is about attendance, not superstition." The constable searched his desk first and found what the children had whispered about for weeks: the Ledger of Discipline. Its cover was bound in cracked brown leather, the title pressed in faded gold leaf. Each page was filled with columns of names written in precise script. Some names were crossed out in red, others underlined. But the ink was wrong, thick, dark, and too glossy to be ink at all. Beside every name was a single word, corrected. When questioned, Mr. Price explained the book as a teaching tool, a record of progress and virtue. Yet as the constable turned the pages, small stains smeared his fingertips. He lifted them to the light. Blood, dried but unmistakable. Mr. Price did not deny it. "Fear is the purest teacher," he said quietly. "Ink fades, blood remembers." The constable demanded to see the cellar. Mr. Price resisted, but when the officers pried the door open, the air that escaped was foul and heavy with decay. In the dim lamplight, they found cages, rows of them, each containing rats in various states of starvation. Beneath the cages were bones, small ones, fragile. Not all belonged to animals. Mr. Price's calm broke only once. When one of the officers kicked a cage aside, revealing a stack of stained notebooks, he shouted, "They were learning. I was teaching them obedience." His voice cracked, echoing off the stone walls. "Do you know what happens when a child defies order? The rot spreads. I stopped it before it consumed them all." He was arrested that night, his wrists bound in iron. But as they led him away, he smiled at the gathered townsfolk and said, "You'll thank me when you see what your children become." The next morning, the ledger was gone. Would you have opened that cellar door, or walked away before hearing what was inside? The trial of Nathaniel Price began in December 1861, held in the frost-bitten courthouse overlooking Derryfield's harbor. Snow fell in slow, heavy flakes that morning, blanketing the town in silence, as though the world itself wanted to muffle what would be spoken inside those walls. Mr. Price stood before the magistrate in his worn black coat, hands bound yet posture unbroken. He looked less like a criminal and more like a priest awaiting confession. The townspeople packed the benches, mothers clutching handkerchiefs, fathers glaring with clenched jaws. And among them, the children, those who had survived his lessons, sat pale and still, their eyes hollow as unlit lamps. The prosecutor read the charges: cruelty, child endangerment, and murder. But evidence was scarce. The cellar, once filled with cages, had been emptied overnight. The bones had vanished. The ledger of discipline was nowhere to be found. Only the children's testimonies remained, each trembling voice recounting the same horrors. The rats, the punishments, the smell of iron, the screams muffled by hymn recitations. Mr. Price listened quietly. When asked to respond, he smiled faintly and said, "Do you punish the surgeon for cutting flesh when it saves the body? Discipline is not cruelty, it is salvation." His words unsettled even the most hardened men in the room. He spoke with conviction, not madness. And when he described how fear purifies the mind, a few jurors shifted uncomfortably, glancing at their own sons seated in the gallery. Then came the testimony of Mary Ellis, a frail girl of 10, whose hands still bore faint scars. She told the court how Mr. Price had made her feed crumbs to the rats, then forced her to watch as they devoured each other. "He said the weakest must be consumed," she whispered. That's how we learn to be strong." The room fell silent. Even the judge, known for his stern demeanor, looked pale. Yet when the verdict was due, something happened that no one could explain. The jurors deliberated for only 20 minutes. When they returned, the foreman's voice trembled as he read the decision. Not guilty by reason of insufficient evidence. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Mothers cried out. One father tried to rush the bench before being restrained. Mr. Price bowed slightly to the court and whispered, "The lesson continues." That night the snowstorm worsened. By dawn, the courthouse stood empty, its front door wide open, and Nathaniel Price nowhere to be found. Would you have believed justice was served, or that something far darker had just been set free? After the trial, Derryfield tried to forget Nathaniel Price. The townsfolk rebuilt their routines. The schoolhouse was closed indefinitely, and the board promised to restore normal instruction come spring. Yet, for those who had sat in his classroom, normality never returned. The nightmares began within a week. Children woke screaming in the dark, clawing at their blankets, gasping that they could feel whiskers brushing against their skin. Some refused to sleep at all, convinced they heard scratching behind their walls. Parents dismissed it as trauma, until the noises started in their own homes. Tiny, deliberate scratches beneath the floorboards, squeals from within the pantry, and always that faint metallic smell like old blood warming in the air. 10-year-old Mary Ellis, whose testimony had helped convict him, grew worse by the day. Her mother found her whispering to the shadows, saying, "He's still teaching me." One morning she awoke to find 3 small bite marks on her wrist, neat, triangular, unmistakable. The doctor said it was self-inflicted, but her mother swore she heard scurrying before dawn. Other children began drawing strange symbols on their slates, circles intersected by crooked lines. The same marks once etched into the wooden floor beneath Mr. Price's desk. When asked what they meant, the children would only reply, "He said it helps us remember." The constable visited each home, assuring families that Mr. Price was gone, likely fled north toward Canada. Yet some swore they saw a lantern moving near the marshes at night, the same place where the janitor had vanished weeks before. Then came the disappearance of Samuel Yates, age 11. His bed was found empty one morning, his window open though it was nailed shut from the inside. On the floor were tiny prints, not human, but not quite animal either. The trail led into the woods and stopped at the old schoolhouse door. Inside, everything was as it had been left, desks overturned, chalk scattered, the blackboard still, faintly marked with the phrase, "Order through fear." But something new lay upon the teacher's desk, a single page torn from the missing ledger. On it was written, in dried red streaks, Lesson 5, Obedience After Absence. When Mary Ellis saw it, she began laughing uncontrollably, whispering, "He's grading us again." The town burned the schoolhouse that night, hoping to end whatever lingered. But the rats came running from the flames, hundreds of them, fleeing in every direction, as though something inside had terrified even them. If you were a parent in Derryfield that winter, would you have stayed to protect your child, or left everything behind? By spring of 1862, snow had melted into the muddy veins of Derryfield, but peace never thawed with it. The townspeople thought the burning of the schoolhouse had ended their torment. Yet beneath the ashes, something survived. It began when Reverend Hollings found a book on the steps of St. Agnes Church, a charred, leather-bound ledger, edges still warm as if pulled from fire. The gold leaf letters had melted into black scars, but the name embossed on the cover remained faintly visible. Nathaniel Price. The Reverend opened it only once. Inside were the same columns of names the constable had described months earlier, but now, beside many of them, was a new inscription written in the same dark fluid. Revised. Some names were those of children who had already vanished. Others belonged to people still living, parents, elders, even the Reverend himself. That evening, Hollings locked the ledger in his study and prayed until dawn. When he awoke, the book was gone. In its place lay a single page, pressed flat upon his Bible. It read simply, Lesson 6. The teacher never leaves. Soon, the rats returned, seen scurrying across pews during Sunday sermons, dropping from rafters, vanishing into cracks in the floor. The church bell rang at midnight, though no one was there to pull the rope. Then came the handwriting. On fences, on doors, on windowsills, perfect cursive words appeared overnight, carved deep as if by a blade. Discipline is mercy. Order, through fear. He is near. At first the townsfolk believed vandals were responsible. But the marks appeared on locked barns, inside sealed cupboards, even on the inside of children's bedroom walls. And every phrase was written in the same red-brown hue that no rain could wash away. Reverend Hollings finally gathered the townspeople in the church, his voice trembling as he urged them to leave Derryfield. Some lessons, he said, are not meant to be retaught. But as he spoke, the bell above began to toll, 12 slow, heavy chimes that shook the rafters. When the townsfolk looked upward, they saw a silhouette standing in the belfry, motionless against the pale light of dawn. The figure's posture was unmistakable, hands clasped neatly behind his back. The constable rushed up the spiral stairs, shouting Mr. Price's name. When he reached the top, the belfry was empty. Only the rope swayed, slick and warm as if freshly handled. At its base lay another torn page from the ledger. Lesson 7. Attendance restored. Would you have stayed in that church to see if he appeared again, or fled before the next bell rang? By the summer of 1862, Derryfield was no longer a town. It was a memory wrapped in silence. Stores stayed shuttered. The postmaster had fled. Even the harbor, once alive with fishermen and children's laughter, was now a place of echoes. No one dared speak of Nathaniel Price anymore, not even in whispers. It began subtly. People noticed their voices faltering when they tried to say his name, as though the air itself resisted it. Words caught in throats. Sentences died mid-breath. The doctor called it hysteria. The reverend called it punishment. But the children knew better. They said he was listening. At night, scratching sounds returned beneath the floorboards, sometimes joined by faint tapping, as though someone were writing. One woman, Mrs. Callahan, swore she heard a voice murmuring from her cellar, "Recite your lessons." When she went to investigate, she found the old school bell lying in the dirt, perfectly clean, its brass glinting as if freshly polished. The constable, desperate to restore order, declared that all traces of the old school be erased. He ordered the remains of the foundation to be buried, the ashes scattered in the marsh. But when the workers began digging, their shovels struck something solid. Wood, preserved beneath the frost. It was a desk, Mr. Price's desk. The men tried to lift it, but it wouldn't budge. One of them, Elias Green, cursed aloud, saying, "Let the devil keep his furniture." Hours later, his wife found him in their barn, eyes wide open, mouth packed with dirt, a small dead rat resting on his tongue. After that, the townspeople stopped speaking altogether. They communicated through gestures, chalk, and silence. Church bells went unmanned. Sermons were written but never read. The wind carried the only voice left, the creak of wood, the scurry of unseen claws, and sometimes faint laughter carried over the marsh at dusk. Visitors from nearby towns began calling Derryfield the hushed place. Travelers claimed to see abandoned houses with candles burning inside, though no one lived there. Others swore that if you stood outside the old school grounds long enough, you could hear a man reciting names from a book, slowly, carefully, before turning the page. Weeks later, a final message appeared carved into the town's notice board, written in perfect cursive, Lesson 8, Silence is Obedience. The next day, the constable's house was found empty. His ledger, however, remained open on his desk, filled with names that had not been written by him. If your town fell silent overnight, would you try to speak, or listen to what the silence was hiding? By autumn of 1862, the marshes beyond Derryfield had swallowed nearly everything: the schoolhouse ruins, the constable's tracks, and what was left of the town's sanity. Fog rolled over the black water every night, thick as breath, and from its depths came the faintest glimmer of light. Those who dared look swore they saw a lantern swaying in slow rhythm, its glow moving with deliberate precision, as if carried by a man pacing in thought. Children called him the Marsh Teacher. Adults refused to name him at all. One hunter, Joseph Harlan, claimed he followed the light one night to see for himself. He said it led him deeper than the path should have gone, past the willow trees, past the stones marked with initials of the missing. There, he found a structure he swore hadn't been there before, a small wooden shack, newly built, though its boards were damp with age. A faint scratching echoed within. When he called out, the scratching stopped. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, he saw shelves lined with glass jars, each holding something unspeakable. Bones, tiny hands, teeth arranged like alphabet, letters. And on the far wall, pinned neatly with nails, hung the missing pages of the Ledger of Discipline. Beneath each page, a name was freshly written in red. Harlan ran. He stumbled through mud and cattails, the fog twisting around him like hands. But before he reached the edge of the marsh, a voice called after him, calm, deliberate, unmistakable. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Harlan? You've yet to learn your lesson." When he returned to town, his hair had turned white. He never spoke. Again. In the weeks that followed, more townsfolk vanished near the marshes. Their lanterns were found extinguished, their footprints ending abruptly at the waterline. At night, the church bell began ringing again, its tone low and distant, as if underwater. Then, one dawn, Reverend Hollings discovered something terrible. On the steps of the church lay a bundle wrapped in burlap. Inside were books, identical ledgers, each marked with the same initials, N.P. Every volume contained new names, written in the same steady hand. The last entry read, Lesson 9, The Return of the Faithful. That evening, a dim light flickered once more in the marsh. The townsfolk watched from their windows, praying it would fade. But the lantern stayed lit until sunrise, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat. If you saw that light burning in the fog, would you follow it, or turn away, knowing it was calling your name? The first child came, back in November. The snow had just begun to fall again when little Samuel Yates, missing since the spring, walked into town barefoot and silent. His clothes were stiff with mud, his eyes pale and unfocused. He did not speak, not even when his mother screamed and wrapped her arms around him. He simply stood there, expression blank, as if unsure what touch meant. Doctors from nearby Bangor examined him, but none could explain the state he was in. His body bore no wounds, yet his heartbeat was unnaturally slow, barely there. When asked where he had been, he replied in a hoarse whisper, "In class." Then, after a pause, he said we were late. A week later, 2 more children returned, Mary Ellis and Thomas Green. Both had vanished months apart. Like Samuel, they were silent, eyes fixed on something beyond sight. When placed together in a room, they began humming softly, in unison. The tune was unfamiliar at first, but Reverend Hollings recognized it. It was the same hymn Mr. Price made his students recite before each punishment. Soon the returned children began gathering at dusk in the town square, facing the direction of the marshes. They would stand in a perfect line, their lips moving silently, as though reciting lessons only they could hear. Parents tried to pull them away, but each child resisted with unnatural strength, their eyes glassy and cold. When questioned again, Samuel finally spoke a second time. He said attendance was poor. He murmured, voice trembling, "He's coming to finish the term." That night, all 3 children vanished once more. Their footprints led only to the edge of the marsh, where the lantern light now burned brighter, steady, unwavering, as though marking the path for others to follow. By morning, every chalkboard in the abandoned homes bore the same writing, carved deep into the wood. Lesson 10, Completion Before Dawn. The Reverend ordered the church bell to be taken down, fearing it would ring again on its own. But as the men climbed the belfry, they froze. The bell was already moving. The rope swayed slowly, rhythmically. though no one touched it. From inside the hollow bell, a child's voice whispered, "Class is in session." When they struck the bell, to silence it, the sound that rang out wasn't metal, it was screaming. Would you have tried to save those children? Or accepted that they were no longer yours to save? December 23rd, 1862. The night Derryfield ended. The wind that evening came howling off the coast, dragging snow like ash through the empty streets. Doors were barred, shutters nailed shut. Yet through the storm, a sound rose above it all, a bell tolling in the distance. Not the church bell this time, but something smaller, sharper, the bell from the schoolhouse. The people gathered at their windows, frozen in dread. There was no schoolhouse left to ring. It had been burned, buried, and forgotten. Still, the bell rang, steady as a metronome, 12 times. Then silence. Moments later, lights appeared. On the horizon, lanterns, dozens of them, moving in perfect formation from the marshes toward the town square. The figures carrying them were small, children, every one of them barefoot, pale and silent, their eyes reflecting the lantern glow like glass marbles. At their head walked a taller figure, coat buttoned to the throat, posture immaculate, hands clasped neatly behind his back. Nathaniel Price had returned. Those who saw him said he looked untouched by time. His hair was combed, his face calm, his voice as smooth as ever when he spoke. "Good evening, pupils. I trust you've reviewed your lessons." The remaining townsfolk fled into their homes, bolting doors, clutching crosses. But one family, the Dunhams, did not run. They had lost their daughter first, and they wanted answers. Mr. Dunham stepped into the street, rifle in hand. "You're not real," he shouted. "You're a ghost, a curse." Price turned toward him and smiled faintly. "Ghosts linger," he said. "Teachers return." The lantern light brightened. The air turned thick and hot, the smell of iron filling every breath. Then the children began to hum, the same slow hymn from the trial, their voices weaving into something deeper, older. Windows shattered. Rats poured from the cracks in the street, thousands of them swirling like black water around Price's feet. By dawn, Derryfield was gone. Travelers passing through found only ashes, half buried in snow. The church bell lay cracked beside the marsh, and in its hollow mouth rested a single item, the charred ledger of discipline, open to its final page. Written there, in dark red strokes, were the words, Lesson 11, Graduation. No bodies were ever found. Only the faint marks of small feet leading back toward the marsh. If you had heard that bell calling in the dark, would you have stayed to learn the final lesson, or prayed to be forgotten by the teacher forever? For years, after Derryfield vanished, no mapmaker dared redraw the boundary lines of that region. The land simply ceased to exist on paper. Travelers who tried to find it spoke of strange echoes in the fog, voices reciting in unison, faint bells in the distance, and once, a man who claimed he saw a child's face reflected in a frozen puddle whispering, "Are you late for class?" When the state finally sent surveyors in the spring of 1871, they reported something impossible. Beneath the snow, the foundations of the town were intact, but every stone, every plank, even the wells were coated in a thin layer of dark residue. Dried blood, they said, though later reports called it rust. And at the center of it all stood the school bell, unbroken, untarnished, its clapper still swinging gently as if a hand had just released it. One of the men, Elias Brigham, took the bell down and brought it home to Concord. Within a month, his children vanished. His wife followed soon after. Neighbors swore they could hear the faint sound of a bell each night from the Brigham attic, though the house had burned to the ground, before authorities could confirm it. From that point on, the Derryfield bell was declared cursed, sealed in a state archive under lock and chain. But according to a letter found decades later, the archivist who sealed it away wrote something strange in his final note. "It rings on its own when the snow falls thickest. It tolls 11 times. And each year, one more child disappears from me." Nearby towns. To this day, no one knows where those children go. Some say it's just coincidence. Others believe Nathaniel Price never died, merely moved his classroom elsewhere. Rumors circulate of abandoned schoolhouses in rural New Hampshire, their blackboards still etched with perfect penmanship, desks aligned too precisely, as though waiting for the bell to sound again, and perhaps most disturbing of all, the ledger. It resurfaced in 1913, bought anonymously at an estate auction in Boston. Its pages were clean, except for one new entry, written in the same neat hand. Lesson 12. Repetition ensures perfection. Who wrote it, no one knows. But witnesses said that when they opened the book, a faint smell of iron filled the room. And somewhere far off, through layers of time and snowfall, a single bell began to toll. They say if you ever hear it, 11 slow rings in the dead of winter, don't look for the sound. Don't listen too closely. Because the teacher never stopped teaching. He just found new students.